Hey guys, this is my review for episode 3 of The Last of Us. Now, this episode was the first episode that really made some major changes to the plot if you compare it to the video game. And the major changes that I'm talking about is the story of Bill. See, in the video game, the level's called Bill's Town. And when you meet Bill, you find out that he lives in this town by himself, and he set up a whole bunch of booby traps. And he's the kind of person that's socially very awkward, doesn't like being around people. He's just a loner. He just likes living by himself. And as you play through Bill's Town, eventually you find out that he had a partner named Frank, and you find out that Frank wasn't happy with Bill and that they broke up, and Frank just went off on his own. But when you see Frank, he's already dead because he killed himself because he was bitten by an infected. So the only backstory we had to go off of on the video game was a note that Frank left for Bill that explained how Frank said he hated Bill's guts, and that's why he left and he wasn't happy. But the change that I like is that in the TV series, you get to meet Bill and Frank. And the major change is that in the TV series, they're in a relationship, and it's a good relationship because they stayed together. Whereas in the video game, they broke up because Frank wasn't happy. Now, this episode, even though it didn't have any action in it, I really enjoyed this episode because it was mainly about Bill and Frank and them living their lives together. Now, in the TV series, when you first meet Bill, he's a lot like the video game version of Bill, socially awkward. He lives in the town by himself, doesn't like being around anybody. But then he meets Frank, who fell into one of his booby traps, and Bill lets him out, and you just see how they, formed a relationship, and it was a healthy relationship because they actually stayed together for years. And what I like about the episode is that it's all about heart. It's all about, when you find the right person and what you're willing to do for them. Now, the part that got to me was when they show, like, it's years later, it's the year 2023, and they show Bill and Frank as old men. And first thing I noticed was Frank was in a wheelchair. And I was like, oh man, he's not looking good. And then that's when I realized that Frank was terminally ill and that he was dying. And Bill was, always there taking care of him, being by his side through thick and thin. But the part that got to me was when Frank said, today's my last day, and that he plans on basically self-deleting. And I felt for Bill in that moment because I put myself in that situation. Like, if it's me and my wife, if we're surviving a cordyceps outbreak, we're just living amongst ourselves in the town by ourselves like Bill did with Frank, and me being with her for all these years, and if she was to get sick like that, and if she got terminally ill and was dying, and if she told me it's her last day, I would be devastated. So I felt for Bill in that moment. And Frank had explained to Bill how he wanted his last day to go, that he wanted them to go get married, and he wanted Bill to cook him a nice meal, and then to take a whole bunch of crushed pills and put it in his wine and he was just going to overdose on that medicine with the wine and just die in his sleep. And Bill did everything he asked. They got married. He cooked them that last meal, and he put the crushed pills in his drink. But what Frank didn't know was Bill put the crushed pills in the wine bottle. So Bill, his plan was to go out with Frank and for them to both die together. And it was sad that, you know, they both went out like that. And it's totally different from the video game, because in the video game it's just Bill and Frank had died, but in the series they both died. But they died happy though, so it's like a bittersweet type ending for that character. But like I said, it was all about heart. You know, I like seeing the backstory with Bill, you know, seeing more details about him and Frank, because these are details that you don't get in the video game. And I really enjoyed seeing that. And I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to, you know, if they have a soulmate that they care about. And it just showed them just living life. I like how they were happy in their relationship. They had their arguments, you know, it wasn't perfect, but they, you know, they stayed together through thick and thin. And it was just nice to see that. Now, the other part of the episode was about Joel and Ellie. You see them at the beginning of the episode before it transitions into Bill and his story, and then you see Joel and Ellie again after Bill dies. Now, what I like about this episode with Joel and Ellie is I can kind of see Joel warming up to Ellie a bit. You know, I can see the subtle changes in his behavior, that he's actually kind of loosening up a little bit, not being so uptight. And he actually smiled at one point towards the end of the episode, which is the first time I've seen Joel smile since before the outbreak. So, you know, I'm really liking what I'm seeing, and I look forward to seeing how Joel and Ellie's friendship, you know, how it gets better as time goes on. And eventually it'll become, I'm hoping it'll be like the games, where it'll be like, it's no longer them being friends. It's like a father and daughter relationship, because that's what people liked about the video game. And I'm very curious to see how they're going to do this in the show. If they're going to mainly just follow what's in the video game, or are they going to make some changes that we're not expecting? You know, but time will tell, and we just have to wait and, you know, watch the future episodes to see how it plays out. But for episode 3, I thought it was very good. You know, even though it didn't really have any action in it, but this episode didn't really need action. You know, I like the backstory with Bill and Frank, and the parts that we got with Joel and Ellie. Looks like next week's episode is going to be full of action, because that looks like it's going to be the Pittsburgh episode where they encounter the hunters. So I look forward to that episode. So this episode, episode 3, I would give it a 9 out of 10. It was really good. A really good episode. I really liked it. And that's pretty much all I got to say about that.